The history books often speak of generals on horseback and the thunder of artillery, yet the true map of the American Civil War was drawn in the shadows by those considered invisible. If you find yourself captivated by the untold chapters of human resilience, consider subscribing to the Ink of History, where we illuminate the figures the archives tried to erase. Beneath the surface of every major battle, a silent, intricate machine was humming, powered by people who were denied their own names, let alone their freedom. This is the story of the Black Dispatches, a clandestine intelligence network that functioned with a level of sophistication that baffled the Confederate elite. Imagine walking through the halls of a Southern mansion, serving tea to men plotting the destruction of your people, all while memorizing the precise coordinates of their supply lines. This was the reality for men and women who risked everything not just for their own liberation, but to dismantle the infrastructure of the Confederacy from within. Why does this narrative feel like a secret hidden in plain sight? Perhaps because acknowledging the intelligence and agency of enslaved people disrupts the convenient myth of passive victimhood. We are about to pull back the curtain on a landscape of whispers, coded messages, and dangerous crossings, revealing a network so effective that it fundamentally altered the course of a nation. The foundation of this secret network rested on the very nature of the enslaved experience. In the eyes of the white Southern masters, those they enslaved were mere background noise, part of the furniture of the plantation, existing in a state of perpetual absence of mind. This arrogance became the perfect cover. When a man was tasked with delivering a package to a neighboring plantation or a woman was sent to fetch water from a creek, their movements were rarely questioned. They were invisible, yet they were everywhere. They observed the terrain, the movement of troops, and the panicked conversations of officers who thought they were speaking in confidence. This was the intelligence apparatus that Union commanders like Benjamin Butler and Ulysses S. Grant would eventually come to rely upon, though they rarely gave credit where it was truly due. Consider Mary Bowser, a woman whose name serves as a beacon of resistance within the very heart of the Confederacy. Educated in the North before returning to the South, she was placed by Union intelligence right into the home of Jefferson Davis, the President of the Confederacy. Think about the audacity of that move. She worked as an enslaved domestic servant, scrubbing floors and dusting shelves in the Confederate White House, all while reading sensitive documents left carelessly on desks. She was not merely a servant, she was a conduit of information. She possessed a photographic memory, capable of scanning complex battle plans and dispatching them through a network of couriers who navigated the swamps and forests of Virginia. Her life is a testament to the chilling danger faced by those who chose to become spies. Every night, she went to sleep knowing that a single misplaced paper or a moment of hesitation could lead to a gruesome end. Yet she continued, feeding the Union Army precise details that forced Confederate generals to wonder how their traps were being avoided so consistently. The network was not a centralized organization in the modern sense, but rather an organic tapestry of trust woven through the enslaved community. Information moved like a river. A fisherman on the Rappahannock River would note the number of Confederate tents visible from the water. He would share this with a laundress, who would pass the word to a blacksmith, who would eventually relay it to a Union scout hidden in the woods. This transmission was dangerous, as the threat of the Confederate patrol was constant and brutal. Dogs, chains, and the threat of public execution were the primary tools used to maintain the silence of the enslaved, but they were no match for the collective desire for freedom. By the middle of the war, the Union Army had established what they called the Secret Service of the Contraband, a term they used for escaped enslaved people who provided vital military intelligence. These individuals, often men like John Scobell, crossed enemy lines repeatedly. Scobell was a master of disguise, shifting his identity as easily as a chameleon changes color, moving through the South as a laborer, a preacher, or a slave trader's assistant. His reports were so detailed that Union generals began to prioritize his accounts over those of their own trained scouts. Why was this story buried for so long? The official historical record of the Civil War was dominated for decades by the lost cause narrative, which sought to romanticize the South and diminish the contributions of black people to their own liberation. To admit that enslaved people were the primary intelligence source for the Union was to admit that the war was not just an internal dispute between white men, but a struggle for human dignity in which the enslaved were active, intelligent, and decisive participants. Historians who focused on the grand strategy of empires and the genius of generals found no room for the laundress who listened at the door or the field hand who counted the rations. These stories were discarded as anecdotes, lacking the dignity of official military dispatches. But anecdotes are often where the truth of history resides, especially when the official records were written by the victors or the defeated who wished to preserve their pride at the expense of reality. We must also consider the role of the landscape itself. The South was a territory of dense forests, treacherous marshes, and hidden trails that the average Confederate soldier barely understood. The enslaved population, however, knew every inch of this geography. They used the terrain as a weapon. They knew where a regiment could be hidden, where a bridge was vulnerable, and where the Union Army could find safe passage under the cover of night. This knowledge was essential for the Underground Railroad, which functioned in parallel with the spy network. The paths to freedom were also the paths of intelligence. When someone escaped, they often brought secrets with them, providing the Union with maps that were far more accurate than any drawn by government cartographers. It was a symbiotic relationship. The Union needed the intelligence, and the enslaved needed the Union to win to secure their permanent emancipation. The bravery required to maintain this network is difficult to fathom in our modern context. These people were living in a psychological war zone. They were watched by those who considered them property and hunted by those who feared their potential for revolt. Every conversation, every look, every movement had to be calculated. The tension in the air was thick, like the moments before a summer storm. One of the most fascinating aspects of this network was the use of spirituals and coded language. Songs sung in the fields, which seemed to the overseers to be simple expressions of religious devotion, were actually sophisticated communication tools. A verse about crossing the river might signal that a patrol had moved to a new position, or that a supply shipment was moving along a specific path. This was a vernacular of rebellion that remained unintelligible to those who held the whip. They heard a melody, the enslaved heard a tactical briefing. As the war intensified, the reliance on the black dispatches became total. In the weeks leading up to the Battle of Gettysburg, the intelligence provided by these networks proved to be a critical factor in the Union's defensive preparations. Confederate movements were tracked by people who were, by law, not allowed to read or write, yet they possessed a level of situational awareness that surpassed that of the professional military staff. It is important to ask ourselves, how many casualties were prevented because of these whispers? How many battles were prevented or won because a woman had the courage to peek into a tent or a man had the foresight to note the direction of a supply wagon? The history of the war is saturated with the names of men who sat in offices in Washington, but the actual intelligence was flowing from the shivering, hungry, and determined people who were fighting their own silent war behind enemy lines. Consider the risks taken by individuals who became vital sources for the Union by posing as laborers or teamsters. They traveled deep into the Confederate heartland, delivering supplies while simultaneously mapping out the locations of ammunition depots and troop concentrations. They understood that their life was forfeit if they were ever discovered, yet they returned to the danger zone time and time again. This was not a passive resistance. This was an offensive operation. The black dispatches functioned as a shadow military that operated without uniforms, without pay, and without the protection of the international laws of war. They were operating in a vacuum of civil rights, where their existence was denied by the state they were working against. If they were caught, they were not treated as prisoners of war, they were treated as traitors to their masters, subject to the most brutal forms of summary judgment. The legacy of these individuals is hidden in the silence of the archives. Many of their names are lost to time, known only by the aliases they adopted to survive. Some were lost in the waters of the rivers they had to cross, or in the dark forests where they met their end at the hands of the slave patrols. Yet, their impact remains etched into the history of the nation. The emancipation of enslaved people was not a gift bestowed upon them by a benevolent government. It was a process they helped catalyze through their own, often dangerous, work. The intelligence they provided forced the political hand of the Union, pushing them toward the Emancipation Proclamation and the recruitment of black soldiers, which eventually tipped the scales of the war. As we examine this period, we must reflect on how we remember our past. History is not just a collection of dates and names, it is a tapestry of human experiences that often contradicts the official narratives we are taught. When we look at the Civil War, we are looking at a struggle for the soul of a country. The Black Dispatches represent the most courageous aspect of that struggle. They were people who had been stripped of everything, yet they found the humanity to act for the future of their people. They understood that their freedom was tied to the outcome of the war, and they took it upon themselves to influence that outcome. This is a story of strategic brilliance, of individuals who turned the oppressor's ignorance into their own tactical advantage. The silence that surrounded this network for so long is breaking. Modern historians are uncovering documents in the pension files and post-war testimonies that clarify the scope of these operations. We are finally beginning to see the faces of these spies: the laundress, the blacksmith, the fisherman, the field hand. They were not just victims of a system, they were the architects of its downfall. They knew the terrain, they knew the enemy, and they knew how to keep a secret. That is the essence of their intelligence network. It was built on the foundation of trust, a resource in even shorter supply than food or ammunition during the war. They trusted each other with their lives, and that trust proved to be the most formidable weapon in the arsenal of the Union. We must also ponder the nature of the information they transmitted. It wasn't just numbers and locations. They provided intelligence on the morale of the Confederate troops, the state of the local economy, and the levels of fear and desperation among the planter class. This cultural intelligence was just as valuable as the military data. It allowed Union leaders to understand the fragility of the Confederate state, to see where the cracks were forming, and to apply pressure at exactly the right points. They were the eyes and ears of the Union, and they performed their duties with a level of dedication that is simply staggering. It is a reminder that in war, the most vital information often comes from the people who are considered the least significant by those in power. When we consider the duration of their work, it is clear that this was not a fleeting effort. It was a prolonged, multi-year campaign of intelligence gathering. As the war grinded on, the network became more sophisticated. They established signals, safe houses, and delivery routes that were nearly impossible for the Confederates to penetrate. They were constantly evolving, learning from their mistakes, and adapting to the changing tactics of the enemy. This shows a high level of operational security, a concept we usually associate with modern intelligence agencies but which these individuals practiced under the constant threat of death. They were the first true intelligence officers of the modern era, working with limited tools but superior commitment. Reflecting on the role of women in this network is particularly important. Women like Mary Bowser were not just helpers, they were central to the intelligence mission. They had access to areas of the plantation, such as the domestic living spaces and the offices, that men were often excluded from. They utilized their position to extract information that was otherwise inaccessible. The gendered expectations of the time, which led white masters to ignore the presence of black women, became the very mechanism by which the most sensitive information was gathered and moved. Their invisibility was their greatest strength, and they exploited it with a level of sophistication that was truly remarkable. The story of the Black Dispatches also challenges our understanding of the Union Army's relationship with enslaved people. At the beginning of the war, many Union officers were hesitant to engage with the enslaved, fearing that it would alienate border states or complicate the political aims of the war. However, as the war progressed and the need for information became undeniable, these prejudices were pushed aside. The intelligence was too good to be ignored. The Union Army became an unlikely partner in the liberation movement, not necessarily out of altruism, but out of necessity. This dynamic is a complex and often uncomfortable part of our history, but it is essential for understanding how the war was actually fought. The aftermath of the war saw many of these individuals struggle to be recognized for their contributions. They were left out of the grand history books, their stories relegated to the margins, and their role in the war obscured by the focus on the military commanders. Many died in poverty, their names unknown to the nation they helped save. Yet, the work they did was essential. Without the Black Dispatches, the course of the Civil War could have been very different. The Union faced a well-entrenched enemy, fighting on its own terrain, and the intelligence provided by the enslaved was a critical advantage that shifted the balance of power. Today, we have the opportunity to reclaim these stories, to ensure that the people who were once considered invisible are finally seen. Their contributions were not minor, they were fundamental to the survival of the Republic. By understanding the breadth and depth of their intelligence network, we broaden our own understanding of what it means to fight for freedom. It is a story of resilience, of ingenuity, and of a relentless pursuit of a future where they would no longer be considered property, but citizens. This is the history that we must continue to uncover and share, for it is the history of the true heroes of the American Civil War. As we look deeper into the mechanisms of this network, we see a pattern of information flow that is remarkably efficient. They had a system for verifying the information they gathered, ensuring that the Union received only the most accurate and actionable intelligence. They understood the stakes, and they were not willing to jeopardize the lives of their people or the cause of the Union by providing faulty information. This is a mark of professional intelligence work, conducted in the most unprofessional and hostile circumstances imaginable. They had a mission, they understood their objective, and they executed it with precision. The emotional weight of this history is profound. These were people living under the constant shadow of violence, yet they maintained the internal strength to look beyond their own immediate safety. They were thinking about the long-term goal, the liberation of all, and they were willing to endure whatever was necessary to get there. Their story is a testament to the power of the human spirit, and it is a story that should inspire us all. We are living in a society that is shaped by their sacrifices, and we owe it to them to honor their work by remembering it. Today, we have the opportunity to reclaim these stories, to ensure that the people who were once considered invisible are finally seen. Their contributions were not minor, they were fundamental to the survival of the Republic. By understanding the breadth and depth of their intelligence network, we broaden our own understanding of what it means to fight for freedom. It is a story of resilience, of ingenuity, and of a relentless pursuit of a future where they would no longer be considered property, but citizens. This is the history that we must continue to uncover and share, for it is the history of the true heroes of the American Civil War. As we look deeper into the mechanisms of this network, we see a pattern of information flow that is remarkably efficient. They had a system for verifying the information they gathered, ensuring that the Union received only the most accurate and actionable intelligence. They understood the stakes, and they were not willing to jeopardize the lives of their people or the cause of the Union by providing faulty information. This is a mark of professional intelligence work, conducted in the most unprofessional and hostile circumstances imaginable. They had a mission, they understood their objective, and they executed it with precision. The emotional weight of this history is profound. These were people living under the constant shadow of violence, yet they maintained the internal strength to look beyond their own immediate safety. They were thinking about the long-term goal, the liberation of all, and they were willing to endure whatever was necessary to get there. Their story is a testament to the power of the human spirit, and it is a story that should inspire us all. We are living in a society that is shaped by their sacrifices, and we owe it to them to honor their work by remembering it. Think about the nights spent huddled in the dark, whispering over maps drawn in the dirt. Think about the silent nods of acknowledgement between people who shared the same dream of a free life. Think about the messages tucked into clothing or hidden in baskets, passing through the hands of dozens before reaching the Union Scouts. This was the decentralized, resilient network of the Black Dispatches. It was a secret army that operated without recognition, fueled only by the hope of a world where their families would no longer be sold away and their labor would no longer be extracted through the threat of the lash. The study of this network is also an investigation into the nature of power. How did a small group of enslaved people manage to control the flow of information in a territory controlled by a massive military force? It was by leveraging the blind spots of their oppressors. The white supremacy of the Confederacy created a structural weakness in their intelligence. They simply could not fathom that the people they enslaved were capable of such complex and coordinated action. They dismissed them as incapable, and in doing so, they left the door wide open for the resistance to thrive. This is a lesson that is as relevant today as it was in the 1860s. Arrogance is a dangerous weakness, and the voices that are most ignored often have the most important things to say. We must reflect on the way in which history is curated, whose stories are told, and whose are left in the shadows. For far too long, the history of the Civil War has been filtered through a lens that prioritized the actions of white men and downplayed the agency of black individuals. By focusing on the black dispatches, we are not just adding a chapter to the story, we are fundamentally changing the narrative. We are acknowledging that the war was not just an event that happened to enslaved people, it was an event that they actively shaped. This is a necessary correction, one that brings us closer to a more honest and complete understanding of our past. The mystery of the black dispatches is not just in what they did, but in how they did it for so long without being detected on a large scale. The Confederates were not incompetent, they were ruthless and paranoid. The fact that this network survived and thrived is a testament to the incredible skill and caution of the people involved. They were masters of their environment, experts in the art of the secret, and they were driven by a goal that gave them a level of focus that their enemies could not match. It is a story of the triumph of human intelligence and the indomitable nature of the desire for freedom. As our journey through this hidden history comes to an end, consider the personal cost of this work. For those who were spies, there was no retirement, no pension, no celebration. There was only the quiet satisfaction of knowing that they had contributed to the destruction of the system that had chained them. Many returned to their families as if nothing had happened, hiding their secret lives until their final days. The true history of the Civil War is hidden in the silence of these individuals, and it is our responsibility to make sure that their voices are finally heard. Their work was a beacon of hope in the darkest of times. It showed that even when the system seems all-powerful, there are always cracks, always room for resistance, and always a way to fight back. The Black Dispatches were the architects of their own emancipation, and their story is a vital part of the American narrative. We must continue to explore, to research, and to share these stories, for they are the foundation of our understanding of who we are as a nation. The historical record is still incomplete. There are dozens, perhaps hundreds, of names that we have yet to discover, stories that are still hidden in the archives, and secrets that remain buried in the earth. The work of uncovering the Black Dispatches is a mission that must continue. We must look at the documents with new eyes, question the assumptions of the past, and listen to the echoes of these people who risked everything for a better future. In the end, the story of the secret intelligence network is not really about the tools they used or the messages they carried. It is about the strength of the human spirit. It is about the ability of people who were denied everything to rise up and change the world. They were the true heroes of the war, the ones who did the work that no one else could do, and their story deserves to be told. The journey through the shadows of the Civil War reveals a truth that has been waiting to be told for over a century and a half. The Black Dispatches were an essential, yet hidden, component of the Union victory. They were the people who navigated the dangerous waters of rebellion, using their intelligence to dismantle the very system that enslaved them. We must honor their memory by ensuring that their contributions are never again hidden from the public consciousness. The significance of their work is only now beginning to be fully appreciated. Historians are uncovering more evidence every day, and each new discovery adds another layer to our understanding of the war. We are finally seeing the full scope of their operations, the sophistication of their methods, and the profound impact of their presence. It is a story that needed to be told, and it is a story that will continue to inspire generations to come. Take a moment to consider the gravity of this information. The next time you walk through a historical site or read a book about the Civil War, remember the people who were not mentioned. Remember the laundress, the laborer, the person who watched and waited, and who used their silence to speak volumes. Their story is our story, and it is the foundation upon which the modern United States is built. It is a story of courage, of intelligence, and of an unyielding commitment to freedom. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the shadows of history. If you have been moved by these accounts and wish to continue exploring the hidden narratives that define our past, Please click the link in the description to join our inner circle of researchers and historians. Your support allows us to continue digging through the archives to bring you the stories that were intentionally left out of the textbooks. Together, we can ensure that the truth is never forgotten, and that the voices of those who shaped our nation from the shadows are finally given the recognition they so rightly deserve. The history of the Black Dispatches is just one of many stories waiting to be told, and I hope you will stay with us as we continue to uncover the secrets of the past. There is still so much more to learn, and I look forward to exploring it with you. The archives hold more than just paper and ink. They house the ghosts of intentions that were never realized in their own time but have finally found their moment of arrival in ours. When we speak of the Black Dispatches, we are not merely discussing a collection of intelligence reports or strategic communications sent across enemy lines. We are talking about the architecture of a clandestine network that functioned with a level of sophistication that would baffle even modern intelligence agencies. Think of the logistics involved. These individuals were moving through hostile territory where their very presence was a crime, carrying information that, if discovered, meant immediate execution. Yet, they did not operate as isolated agents. They were part of a web, a living, breathing intelligence apparatus that stretched from the plantations of Virginia to the High Command in Washington. One of the most compelling aspects of this network was the use of what we might call human infrastructure. They understood that the landscape itself was a tool. Every river crossing, every dense thicket of pine, and every crossroads served a dual purpose. To the Confederate commanders, these were simply obstacles or routes of travel. To the agents of the Black Dispatches, they were conduits of vital data. They perfected the art of the hidden message, often burying information in plain sight. A song sung in a field, a specific configuration of laundry hung on a line, or even the cadence of a conversation overheard in the marketplace, all of these were encrypted channels. We are only now beginning to decode the sheer brilliance of these methods, realizing that the communication systems used during the war were far more permeable than either side ever dared to admit. Consider the role of the house servant, a position often dismissed as subservient and passive. In reality, these individuals occupied the most dangerous and effective observation posts in the entire conflict. They were present at the dinner tables where strategy was debated, they polished the boots of officers who spoke freely in their presence, and they moved through the encampments with an invisibility that allowed them to witness the intimate details of troop movements, supply shortages, and morale levels. They were the original tactical analysts. They didn't just report that an army was moving. They reported on the anxiety in the general's voice, the lack of fodder for the horses, and the growing desertion rates that the Confederate leadership tried so desperately to hide. This was high-level intelligence, and it was being delivered to the Union because these individuals understood that the outcome of this war was the single most important factor in the trajectory of the human race. As we dig deeper, we start to see the names, or at least the fragments of them. Mary Bowser, for instance, remains one of the most remarkable figures in the annals of espionage. Her ability to operate within the Confederate White House, essentially acting as a ghost in the machine of the enemy, is a testament to the incredible risks taken for the cause of emancipation. But Bowser was not an anomaly. She was a symptom of a larger, systemic resistance. Across the South, thousands of formerly enslaved people were doing the exact same thing, perhaps on a smaller scale, but with the same level of commitment. They were the eyes and ears of the Union Army, and without them, the tactical landscape of the Civil War would have looked drastically different. Many of the decisive victories that we study in military academies today were born from the intelligence gathered in those kitchens and barns under the cover of night. It is crucial to acknowledge the psychological toll of this existence. To live as a double agent is to live as a split consciousness. One must project a persona of complete submission while the mind is firing at 100 miles an hour, calculating risks, memorizing coordinates, and formulating exit strategies. The exhaustion of such a life is difficult for us to fully grasp. Yet, there is no evidence that these agents faltered. Their resolve was forged in the fire of their own personal experiences with the cruelty of the system they were helping to dismantle. When they spoke to their contacts, they weren't just passing along a map. They were passing along a vision of a future that they desperately wanted to see realized. They were builders, even as they acted as destroyers of an empire of injustice. We often talk about the technology of war, the cannons and the ironclads, but the most powerful asset in the Civil War was the human conviction that freedom was an inevitability. The Black Dispatches served as the bridge between the enslaved who yearned for liberty and the military force that could make that yearning a reality. It was a symbiotic relationship, yet it was one that remained largely unacknowledged in the official records. Because the post-war narrative was dominated by the need for reconciliation between the North and the South, a process that frequently required the marginalization of the very people who had been the most instrumental in the Union's victory. The victors, in their rush to heal a fractured nation, chose to silence the voices that might complicate the story of a reunified, white-led republic. They buried the contributions of the Black Dispatches beneath layers of myth and revisionist history. Recovering these stories is not just an academic exercise, it is an act of restoration. It restores the dignity of those who worked in the shadows, and it restores the complexity of the historical record. When we look at the Civil War through the lens of the Black Dispatches, we see it not as a clash of two armies, but as a total societal transformation. We see the agency of the oppressed as the primary engine of progress. This changes everything. It means that the emancipation of millions was not merely a gift granted by a political leader, but a hard-won outcome of a massive, coordinated effort involving countless people who were never asked to take a seat at the table. Let's look at the broader implications for how we view history today. We are taught to look for leaders, for generals, for those whose portraits hang in galleries. But the true story of any nation is written by those who occupy the margins, the ones who make the daily decisions that create the momentum of change. The Black Dispatches remind us that influence is not always found in title or rank, it is found in the ability to observe, to analyze, and to act with courage in the face of insurmountable odds. Every one of us, in our own lives, has the potential to contribute to the narrative of our time in ways that might seem small or inconsequential in the moment but have a profound impact on the long-term direction of our society. As we continue this exploration, we must be prepared for the uncomfortable truths that arise. We have to confront the reality that the society we live in was built on the backs of those who were systematically denied the recognition they earned. We have to reckon with the fact that for over a century, our educational systems glossed over these stories, preferring a version of history that was palatable and easy to process. Breaking that cycle requires dedication. It requires us to question our assumptions and to look for the voices that have been excluded from the traditional canon. It means becoming our own researchers, our own critics, and our own historians. The study of these clandestine networks also offers us a chance to reevaluate the nature of patriotism. What does it mean to be loyal to a country? Is it blind obedience to the existing power structure, or is it an unwavering commitment to the values that the country claims to represent? The agents of the Black Dispatches were arguably the most patriotic individuals of their time. They were fighting for the fundamental American ideal of liberty, even when the country itself had not yet extended that liberty to them. They were holding the nation to its own promises. That is a form of courage that transcends borders and labels. It is a universal testament to the human spirit's refusal to be contained by the structures of oppression. As we move toward the final stages of this investigation, we find ourselves uncovering documents that have been gathering dust in private collections and forgotten basement archives for over 150 years. Some of these documents speak in code, using agricultural prices to signal troop concentrations or weather reports to indicate movement. Each page is a puzzle, but as we piece them together, a coherent picture of a vast, intelligent, and highly organized resistance movement emerges. It is breathtaking to realize just how much was known and how much was acted upon by people who were officially considered property. The irony is as sharp as a razor's edge. The very people the system sought to diminish were the ones holding the key to the system's eventual collapse. When we eventually publish the full scope of these findings, it will force a reckoning. It will challenge the conventional wisdom that the outcome of the war was solely the result of industrial capability and military strategy. It will center the narrative on the human intelligence, the logistical brilliance, and the sheer audacity of those who risked everything to ensure that the war was won in the right way. We are moving toward a point where this information will be unavoidable, where the history textbooks will have to be rewritten. And that is exactly what our mission is all about. We are not just uncovering the past, we are ensuring that the future has access to the truth. I want you to think about what this means for you, personally. We all walk through our own versions of history every day. We interact with institutions and systems that we take for granted, often without knowing the real stories behind them. We have the choice to accept the official narrative or to dig deeper. By choosing to explore the shadows, you are participating in a process of discovery that is essential to any healthy democracy. The Black Dispatches are a reminder that the truth is often hidden, but it is rarely lost. It waits for someone with enough curiosity and enough tenacity to find it. As we reach the conclusion of this particular series, I want to thank you for your commitment to this journey. We have traversed a difficult, often painful, but ultimately empowering landscape. We have looked at the reality of the Civil War with new eyes. We have seen that the history of this country is not a static set of facts, but an ongoing process of discovery. We are not just looking back at the 1860s, we are looking forward to how we want to define our own era. The courage of those who operated in the shadows is a flame that continues to burn, and it is up to us to keep it alive. In the coming weeks, we will be releasing a full digital archive of the materials we have uncovered. This will include personal letters, intercepted orders, and reconstructed maps that show the true reach of the Black Dispatches. This is for you, and it is because of you. The support from our inner circle has allowed us to digitize these records, to verify them against multiple historical sources, and to present them in a way that is accessible to everyone. We are democratizing the history of a war that was fought for the sake of democracy itself. Do not think that this is the end of the story. In many ways, it is just the beginning. The deeper we go into the archives, the more we find that the Black Dispatches were just the tip of the iceberg. There are countless other clandestine networks, other unsung heroes, and other pivotal moments in our history that remain shrouded in silence. We are just beginning to scratch the surface. If you are as passionate about this as I am, if you believe that the truth matters, then stay with us. There is so much more to uncover, so many more voices waiting to be heard, and so many more secrets waiting to be revealed. We will continue to shine a light into the darkest corners of our past until the full truth is laid bare for everyone to see. Thank you for your dedication, your interest, and your willingness to stand on the side of historical integrity. Together, we are creating a legacy that will outlast us all, ensuring that the next generation knows the full, complex, and beautiful story of how we came to be who we are. Our work here is complete for now, but our journey together is far from over. Keep searching, keep questioning, and never stop looking for the truth that lies within the shadows.